Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank St. Anthony's and Baycare for this opportunity. Thank all of you for investing an hour of your time here. I'm going to try to make it worth your while. We're going to talk about how coronary artery disease starts and how it develops. I'm going to construct a metaphor of the coronary arteries and their branches like the trunk and branches of a tree. So you're going to hear me repeatedly referring to the coronary tree. We're going to look at some pictures from the cath lab, look at coronary arteries from the perspective that I see them in my daily work. We're going to talk about how the heart can heal itself. And then we're going to close with a little bit of fun. We're going to talk about how to be your own best doctor. So this is your first look at the coronary tree. These are the arteries that I deal with every day. The blood that is inside the heart doesn't nourish the heart muscle. So the very first branches off of the aorta, the big artery coming up out of the heart, are the coronary arteries that reflect back down onto the surface of the heart, and their role is to provide blood flow to the heart muscle. So that's your first look at the coronary tree. Now here's your second look at the coronary tree. This is from the cardiac cath lab, so this is what we call a cath in shorthand. And there is a catheter placed here at the mouth of the coronary artery, and we're making pictures. Coronary disease shows up as narrow spots. Cholesterol plaque shows up as narrow spots inside those arteries. So that's your second look at the coronary tree. Here is another picture. This is of a right coronary artery. This one swings down the right-hand side of the heart and provides blood flow to the bottom surface of the heart. One more view. This is the catheter. This is a right coronary artery. The motion you see is actually the motion of the heart beating. Is everybody with me so far? We've talked about there's three coronary arteries. We've seen a diagram of them, and we've seen an initial picture from the cardiac cath lab. So that's what normal looks like. That's normal coronary arteries. So let's talk a little bit about coronary disease. It's the leading cause of death every year in the United States this past century, except for 1 year, 1918, which was the last time there was a big flu pandemic. There's a heart attack every 26 seconds in our country, and every minute one American dies of coronary disease. Now, when I'm talking to people, I use something I call the 50-50 rule. This is what I say. If you live to be 50 in America, then you have a 50-50 chance of having a heart attack or a stroke during the remainder of your lifespan. That's just what happens to people because it's the nature of human beings to harden our arteries. So I'd ask the rhetorical question, what else do you need to know in order to be interested in reducing your risk? And we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. The term atherosclerosis is an old one. That's from the Greeks. So ather means grainy, and sclerosis means hardening. So as far back as the Greeks, they knew that there was grainy hardening of the arteries. It's just that they didn't know what it meant. That's the old term. I try not to use a lot of big scientific terms in a community talk, but if there's one that I'm going to try to drive home and make everybody understand, it's the concept of endothelial dysfunction. And this is a fancy explanation of it. It's the gradual deterioration of the function of the inner lining of the arteries, which is what leads to cholesterol plaques. Here's how it happens. This is a cross-section of a normal coronary artery. The building block of plaque inside our coronaries is LDL cholesterol. So LDL cholesterol is the building block of arterial plaque. And the things that you would have to live in a cave not to know were associated with coronary disease, like diabetes, smoking, and hypertension, they lead to endothelial dysfunction. And in plain English, that means it makes the inside lining of the artery sticky so that the LDL cholesterol sticks to it better. Okay? That's why hypertension, smoking, diabetes are causative factors for coronary disease. This is a cutaway slide of a coronary artery. So there's three layers to our coronary arteries. There's a rigid outer sheath. There's a middle layer of smooth muscle cells. That's there so that an artery can constrict or dilate in accordance with the needs of the body. The endothelium is the single cell inner lining. And that's what gets sticky in coronary disease. So to me, it's an important reminder about the fragility of life, that the barrier between arterial health and arterial disease is just one cell layer thick. So over time, LDL cholesterol gets deposited beneath the endothelial layer and starts to build up plaque inside the arteries. Let's talk a little bit about the elements of a cholesterol profile. And I urge people to know these numbers like they know their phone number, because they're just as important. Total cholesterol is usually, the target is less than 200. And you need to remember that total cholesterol lumps together stuff that's good for you, LDL, and stuff that's bad for you, which is HDL. I said that wrong. LDL is bad for you, HDL is good. Why is that? LDL is the stuff that is on its way into the wall of the artery to make plaque. HDL is just the reverse. Conceptually, HDL is the stuff that's being withdrawn from the wall of the artery. So there is an equilibrium. All of us want our LDL as low as possible, our HDL as high as possible. We'll talk about excellent drugs that we have to lower LDL. Those are the statin medications, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more later. The current thinking about HDL is that it is what it is. It's determined largely genetically, and we used to think that if we had good medicines to raise HDL, that would help. That has turned out not to be the case. So other than altering your HDL with a diet and exercise program, your HDL is basically determined genetically. The fourth number in a cholesterol profile is the triglycerides. Triglycerides are the simplest form of fats. They are the element of the lipid profile that goes up and down the most rapidly. If you have a couple of bad meals in a row, you're going to get a spike in your triglycerides. And the way to understand triglycerides is that they're like bad company. So high triglycerides will make LDL much more likely to stick to the wall of the artery, and it'll make HDL a lot less likely to come out. Sir?
Your total cholesterol, the number there is minus 200. What are the other numbers, the LDL?
Most people want for people who don't have established heart disease, the LDL target is less than 130. If a person has established heart disease, a stroke or a heart attack, then the number is at least less than 100. Aim for 70. In our line of work, we say that the lower the LDL, the better. So I'm hammering this home. Yes, sir.
How about the ratio between HDL and LDL and total cholesterol?
That ratio is LDL over HDL. The higher the number, the higher your risk. So that's a way of forming that ratio.
But I understood if it's below, I think it's 3.5 or something,
that's desirable. All right, because that would mean that your LDL is relatively low and your HDL is relatively high. So that's favorable. The lower that ratio, the better. I think that's a good point. So I'm going to hammer this home a little bit about risk factors. Diabetes is a risk factor because it makes the inside of the artery sweet and sticky. Hypertension, smoking is a risk factor because it turns the inside of the artery into an ashtray. Hypertension damages the endothelial cells mechanically so that they don't have the same buffer function. And elevated cholesterol, once again, is the building block for arterial plaque. So I was thinking of a visual way that I might be able to hammer this point home. And this is what I came up with. If you have low LDL and you've got healthy endothelium, this is the way that the LDL particles glide down your coronary artery. It's like Apollo Ono in the Olympics. Now, if you've got a much higher LDL and you've got other risk factors that give you endothelial dysfunction, then things look more like this. Looks like a bunch of kids trying to run through mud. So these are little LDL particles trying to make their way down a coronary artery. Look at these little LDL particles here. They're going to get stuck, and that's what's going to start plaque buildup inside the artery. Everybody with me on that one? Okay, that's my visual. Once again, sugar makes it sticky. High pressure causes blowouts. Smoking turns the endothelium into a you-know-what. And this is what you wind up with. This is another cutaway of the coronary. And we start to build up larger amounts of plaque inside the wall of the artery, and the center of it starts to become liquefied. And that's almost like a little sore, almost like a little sterile abscess inside the wall of the artery. And it becomes inflamed. If you could look at it directly, it'd look red. What brings people to the hospital is when one of these plaque ruptures. So here's a cross-section of a coronary artery. There's the outside of the artery. This is the channel that the blood has to go through, and all of this is cholesterol plaque. This unfortunate soul has ruptured their plaque right down here, and the soft contents of the plaque have become exposed to the blood flow. That's a potent stimulus for blood clot formation. And that's how a person goes from having an artery that is mildly or moderately narrowed to an artery that is completely blocked up, and they wind up in the emergency room. It's the mechanism of plaque rupture. Now, this is a slide that my cardiology professor showed us in medical school. So this is an old-timey one, but I still like to show this for a couple of reasons. Number one, when I see that look on a person's face in the emergency room, I know that there's a very high probability I'm dealing with the real thing. This person is really sick. And the second thing is that the artist has given a nice summary of the risk factors. This guy's coming out of a restaurant. He looks like he's been in there before. It's cold weather. He's carrying a suitcase uphill, and he's clutching at his chest because pain is occurring in his left-hand side of his chest and radiating down his arm. And if you look carefully, it's caused him to drop his cigarette right down here. So that kind of encapsulates all of the risk factors. But there is another way in which this picture is really out of date, and that's because this is a white man. Coronary disease in our age is an equal opportunity disease for men and women. And there are some important differences between the sexes in that regard. With men, the classic description of chest pain, crushing, tightness, squeezing, radiating down the arms, maybe going to the neck, that is the most common presentation. In women, the symptoms tend to be significantly more subtle. They might be shortness of breath. They might be an overwhelming sense of fatigue. It might be indigestion. It might be excessive perspiration. So the symptoms of coronary disease are more subtle in women. In our society, women are less likely to be tested for coronary disease. When they do have heart attacks, they don't do as well, and they are more likely to have a second heart attack in the near future. So we do need to develop a greater degree of sensitivity about coronary disease in women. I have a couple of slides in that regard. Age groups are down here, and that may not project very well, but there's 20 to 24, increasing age groups to 75 plus here. Males are in green and females are in purple. So the point is that up until retirement age, up until when we go on Medicare, coronary disease is more common in men than in women. But by the time we get up to 75, it's actually more common in women than in men. So after menopause, women catch up to men in terms of their chances of coming down with coronary disease. Yes, sir?
Would that be because there's less men?
These are percentages, but your point is well taken. Your point is well taken. We have made greater strides in reducing the mortality in men here in red over the time frame from 79 through 99 than in women. So we have work to do with women in heart disease. Let's look at some real life examples of coronary disease. There is a disorder called unstable angina pectoris, or sometimes in the media you'll see it referred to as ACS, which stands for acute coronary syndrome. And the concept there, getting back to our metaphor of the coronary tree, is that the tree is in danger of losing a major branch. So what does that look like to the cardiologist in the cath lab? Well, it looks like this. Here's my catheter.